we didn't have recording technology when Beethoven wrote this, so we don't have an authentic reproduction of this piece. Everything comes down to what he wrote on the piece of paper and how each conductor interprets that. Now we have a catalog of music from the 20th century onward, but these are, 100+ years after they were originally written. So we don't know what the composers would have thought of the way that we perform music. This particular recording is from Amsterdam Symphony Orchestra. I haven't heard it before, but I'm sure it's excellent. You might know in classical music, the interpretation of a piece depends on the conductor. So each orchestra might perform a piece of music a little bit differently. I like to think of the conductor as almost like a mixer in pop music. They can adjust the volume, the tempo, and a lot of little details that can really add up to make a completely different musical experience than what was perhaps even originally intended. This is something that is beautiful, but also it can be very frustrating for composers, I know, because something might not be performed the way that you imagined it. And sometimes that is phenomenal because the music is interpreted in a completely different way than you ever thought it could be. And sometimes you might not like the result. But Beethoven isn't alive today, so who's to say what he would think? I'm getting a little off topic here, but let's get started. Everyone's getting ready, settling in. Okay, so I noticed a few things first off. The first thing has nothing to do with the music, but it's interesting. I have noticed in a lot of classical recordings, the cameraman will often focus on some of the female members of the orchestra. For a long time, women were actually not allowed to perform in orchestras. It wasn't until about the mid-20th century that you started getting women performing in orchestras in the Western world. So I think that oftentimes the cameraman will nod to like, hey, we got women. But as far as the music goes, this is such a powerful introduction to a piece of music. The first thing is that there's a long note held by winds, by strings, and I think this is a nod to the first movement, which we didn't listen to. You don't need to have heard that to appreciate this piece of music. So then it goes into a very simple melody with a very simple rhythmic motif. A motif is... Okay, I looked up the definition of motif so that I can define it more clearly for everybody because I might use this word a lot. So it's a brief melodic or rhythmic formula out of which longer passages are developed. That is the perfect definition for what we're looking at here. The motif that I'm talking about is just da, 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 da. That's the rhythm that is really the backbone of this piece. It repeats over and over again, and yet it never becomes tiresome. I think that is part of the beauty of using a lot of simplicity in music. If you have a complex motif, it can be difficult to repeat it over and over again without the audience really catching on. But if you have something that's very simple, that feels very natural, it can really serve as a good foundation for a piece of music. So you have this rhythmic motif, and even though it's very simple, it is such a beautiful melody. So now Beethoven is going to introduce what's called a counter melody, which is a secondary melody to sit on top of the first one. It complements the other one, but it's also very different. So we'll take a listen to that. So this melody is very different to the first one that we heard. It's very lyrical, it's very fluid, it's not quite as choppy and abrupt. The first one sounds almost like a march, and this one sounds like a song that's being sung by a loving mother. Another thing that I love about this, usually music, all music, pop music, classical music, is in 8-bar phrases. So there's an idea that lasts 4 bars and it's repeated for another 4 bars and then you move on. But this particular piece, Beethoven, wrote it so that the idea repeats again for a 3rd time, and it's a bit of a surprise because we're so not used to hearing that. So we'll listen to this melody again and you'll hear it. It'll change a little bit the 2nd time around, and then you'll expect it to move on to a different phrase, but it doesn't. It repeats again. It's so interesting. Okay, so the counter melody was originally played by the celli to be correct, and now it's the violins that are playing it. So it's up an octave, and he also introduced a new counter melody which has a different rhythmic motif. So it's da 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 da, and it fits in well with the original rhythmic motif. So let's listen to that again. Now the violins have taken that counter melody that we know and love up another octave to increase the intensity. Because oftentimes what composers do to increase intensity is add more of a range. So you've got a lot more instruments in the low range, a lot more instruments in the high range. And when you fill that out, it sounds so much more full as opposed to keeping everything within the same octave. We've got the woodwinds playing joined by the French horns. I just love that. I love that these are 12-bar phrases because intuitively you think it's going to end, but then it just pulls you into another 4 bars that you were expecting because you've heard it before, but it's so unusual that it just captivates your attention. Transitioning. So I think this is a callback to the first movement, the Pastoral Symphony. It features a lot of triplets. I'm not sure why that sounds pastoral, but it does, it works. And the melody here is noticeably different to what we just heard. So there's a distinct change, but because all of the same instruments are still playing, but they're playing a different theme, they weren't cut out completely, there's this sense of continuity. Still have that backbone, that rhythmic motif. I'm telling you, it's the foundation of this piece. Something that you have to admire is how much complexity there is in writing classical music, especially in the era before computers, because all Beethoven used was a piano and his imagination and some paper and a pencil. And look at how many different themes are going on and how many different instruments. It's just so much to keep track of. I have written music with paper and pencil for multiple instruments, but never full orchestra. I don't know if there would be anyone today that could do it that well now, because we're just all so pampered by the computer playing everything back for us. You don't have to think as much. So I'm going to talk about this particular performance now because it's really phenomenal. Something that is necessary for a good classical performance, for orchestral music, is for all the instruments to blend together. And something you may often find is that in some orchestras, there are individuals that maybe have a little bit too much ego and they want to stick out, they want to be heard. But what makes for a good performance is that blending. And so I noticed it now because the flutes came in a pretty high octave, so it did stick out. It was a noticeable change in the music, but because of the way the flautist blended his tone and his dynamics with the rest of the orchestra, even though it was a noticeable change, it still felt like this coherent piece of music. Let's listen to that again. Part of what the flautist did is he started the note fairly quietly, but then he increased his volume to really bring out the melody on his particular instrument. So it sounds a little bit like a solo, but the way that it comes in gradually, it blends well with the rest of the piece. I wonder if he was instructed to do that or if it just happened in the moment. Sometimes a conductor will, in the moment, come up with an idea of how he wants to interpret the piece based on what he's currently hearing. And so one way that he can do that is he can point at the individual that's about to play something and give them a cue as to what volume he wants them to use. He'll either hold back a little bit or really tell them to expand. Conducting is a lot like a dance. You can give a very detailed movement with your hand, and an orchestra will interpret that in one way. And something else is that oftentimes the facial expression of the conductor has a very big impact on the way a piece is performed. You can see now he has this expression of like intensity and sadness, and I think that the performers are taking that and interpreting that together. And that's something that is so wonderful about live classical performances, because every one of them is different. Even if you take the same conductor, the same orchestra, the same day, it's gonna sound different. And that's because you have up to 100 people participating in this group effort to make one song. Okay, I'll rewind it. Another thing I really like about Beethoven is he subverts expectations. So you were getting this increase in intensity because the volume was increasing, the articulation was getting more intense. And so you think, oh, is it going to be a really intense section right now? Are we going to hear something very dramatic? And then it's quiet. Beethoven knows how to give specific cues that people will interpret a certain way because of the way music had been written for so long, and subvert those expectations. And that's something I really like about him as a composer versus some other composers. The key to writing a good piece of music is to play with people's expectations. So you want to give them a little taste of what they want, but you also want to take them on a journey. Sorry, I had to stop for a second. My dog had to pee, so I had to let him out. Okay. Where were we? Okay, that's interesting. I didn't notice this before, but the melody used to go da 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 do 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 do. But he wrote triplets instead of 16th notes to kind of keep the same triplet feel that happened in the B section. Instead of da, 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 it's da, 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 da. So it's a very minor change, but subconsciously or consciously, as we're talking about it now, you might register it and it will help you relate the different melodic and rhythmic motifs that you've heard and incorporate them into just one musical experience. And this is something I love about classical music. There's oftentimes these very minor changes to something, but you listen to it, the more you can pick out. So you can listen to it hundreds of times and still find something new. So here begins this violin rhythmic and melodic motif where they're playing a scale very quickly and it's quiet, but there's a lot of separation between the notes. So there's like this quiet intensity to it, and that is going to build and expand. So what's cool about this section is that you have a few different melodic ideas and they're being passed, like almost like a hot potato, from one section of the strings to another. So you've got this kind of fast scalar motif, and then you've got the main rhythm that we've been talking about this whole time. And it's changing from the violins to the cellos, so you're getting high instruments playing something, it's being passed down to the lower instruments. But since he's sticking to the string section at this time, there's this kind of cohesiveness of the timbre, so it's not quite as noticeable, but you feel like you're being played with a little bit. Now I can interrupt. That was satisfying. So now we have that kind of scalar pattern that the violins have been playing for the last couple minutes in the woodwinds, so it was handed off. And the strings are playing the original motif that we heard in the first few seconds of the piece, but they're playing it with a completely different intensity now. It's less legato, so it's a little bit more, the notes are a little bit more separated, and it has a heavier articulation on the front end. So it's being hit harder, and it changes the way that motif sounds entirely. The timpani is also playing it. I'm being toyed with so much because my heart is being pulled in so many different directions. The dynamics keep changing. I keep thinking, oh, this is the moment. And then it changes. And it is just captivating my attention. I think that's why I like this piece, because it manages to be so simple. Some of these ideas are so simple, but my expectations keep getting subverted. So no matter how many times I listen to this, I'm always surprised. You can do so many things with the exact same small rhythmic motif. And he's passing it around the orchestra again. Let's listen to that. Clarinets, French horns, pizzicato strings, oboe and flutes, clarinets, horns, pizzicato strings. So he's taken one melody and just broken it up between different groups of instruments. So you're hearing an entire phrase that you've already heard before, but it's moving around the orchestra. That creates a sense of movement, of change, a little bit of uncertainty, like what's gonna stick when. That ending always catches me off guard a little bit, but that's partly why I like it, because there's so much movement and uncertainty. The strings come in very suddenly with that small rhythmic motif again, but they play it with so much certainty and finality that it's like, oh, this experience is finally over. I'm sad. Look at the expression on the conductor's face. He's still in the moment emotionally, so he has this weight upon him, but look at the gratitude that he has for the members of his orchestra. That is a sign of a good conductor. I recommend that you watch this performance on your own without all of my interruptions. See if you can pick out all of the little things that I showed you and just enjoy the piece. I've heard it so many times, but every time I hear it, it is such a treat. So thank you for watching my reaction. Hopefully you learned something or just enjoyed it. I'm going to do more. So if you liked it, please subscribe and hit the like button. That will help. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you next time.